Here's an interesting statement from the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, that you might have missed.
Ukrainian.
One moment, here it is. So here's the statement. Zelensky says that partner intelligence agencies are reporting that the Russian Federation's stance is being advanced through Ukrainian actors. I'm not sure about you, but it really struck a deep chord with me, and I began to ponder, what exactly does he intend to convey by that statement? Because in this specific video address, and I'll show you the clip in a moment, Volodymyr Zelensky doesn't specify what he means. So, is this a reaction to rhetoric that genuinely repeats the Russian narrative? Or is it a reaction to an opinion that significantly diverges from the official position of Volodymyr Zelensky and the president's office team concerning the negotiation track, and consequently the official stance on those particular negotiations? Regarding those 28 points, it's quite plausible that they are indeed very far from perfect or ideal in any sense. Or could this just be a reaction to something that occurred? Could this be a refusal to accept certain advice, perhaps advice that's publicly expressed by entirely official representatives of various Ukrainian government bodies? For example, is he referring to the counsel provided by such officials, or say from members of parliament? I don't know. You can write what you think in the comments, but first let's listen to this clip and try to figure it out.
That the delegation is adhering to. Furthermore, it would be exceptionally beneficial if no divergent signals, no un-Ukrainian messages originated from within Ukraine itself. I'm currently receiving information from our partner intelligence agencies indicating that the Russian position has begun to penetrate, notably via certain individuals within Ukraine. This absolutely does not help the situation. We have our sovereign state's position and we have our Ukrainian dignity. We need to advance in a manner that reinforces it, rather than weakening or undermining its foundation. I truly hope that those who this message is for will heed me right now. With a Ukrainian passport, one must feel a sense of responsibility for Ukraine, and
So it's quite evident that the individual whom Volodymyr Zelensky is addressing is indeed paying very close attention to his words. Consequently, it creates the impression that Volodymyr Zelensky's and the president's office team's steps on the negotiation track have been commented on multiple times, and perhaps not in a complimentary manner. So that means it's not being done in a complimentary, fashionable manner. That's the first impression. Second, people with Ukrainian passports. These are clearly individuals residing within Ukraine. But all right, fine, they are indeed in Ukraine. Who could this possibly be? Now, if we take the verb Zelensky himself used to undermine, and we carefully analyze this video by cross-referencing it with comments and statements made approximately concurrently, then in my search, I really only discovered a handful of posts that could have truly provoked such an intense reaction, you know? For instance, a post came from a political adversary of Volodymyr Zelensky, though not one directly involved. Honcharenko, the leader of the European Solidarity faction in parliament, is the one who penned this very post. All right, let's take a look then. We simply don't have any funds. The mobilization efforts have failed. The troops are weary. Mass unauthorized departures for military units. We still haven't built our own missile. There's immense corruption in both defense and energy. All these factors hinder the destruction of an adversary like Russia. Many people talk about the Finnish scenario, but I'm here to tell you, because you certainly didn't know this, that the Finns not only officially gave up their territory, but also agreed to a Soviet military base near Helsinki. We don't have such conditions. We are not capitulating, so let's live in reality. And then, in all caps, it's plainly written, we need peace. And the terms Americans devised are good, aside from the Donbass withdrawal and a few other considerations. So, we need peace. The terms the Americans developed are good, and everything bad is a consequence of Volodymyr Zelensky and his team's leadership. And now, the Americans are doing what they can. And Honcharenko, in essence, is advocating that the proposal currently presented should be agreed upon without excessive deliberation. He believes that aside from the Donbass withdrawal, all other aspects are fine, making it a good plan. He literally says the Americans developed good terms. It is quite possible that Volodymyr Zelensky is actually suggesting that Honcharenko is promoting a Russian narrative. But that's not all, my friends. I came across another quite intriguing post, and you'll be truly amazed when you discover its author. Yulia Mendel, for those who recall, was previously Volodymyr Zelensky's press secretary, preceding Mr. Nikiforov, who currently oversees presidential communications. She published a post in English, and it appears evident that Mendel's communication is predominantly aimed at to the English-speaking audience. But for what reason is she making this post in the English language? So why is she speaking to an English-speaking audience? Is this in essence an appeal to those who make decisions? The decision makers in our nation speak the official Ukrainian language, if those are indeed the individuals Mendel is speaking to. So it's a huge confusion. Anyway, what does Mendel write? Let's delve into this translation. Mendel asserts that the arguments concerning Russia having seized such a small amount of territory appear rather naive, especially when one takes into account the immense human casualties. Over the past 3 years, our losses exceed the entire populations of certain European nations, Mendel states. My nation is bleeding profoundly. Many individuals instinctively reject any peace proposal, erroneously believing that through their actions, they are actively defending Ukraine. With all due respect, this is clear evidence indicating that they truly have no understanding of the actual events currently transpiring on our front lines and throughout our nation right now. Right? And this specific post, it truly is quite emotional, and based on the very character of this post, we can discern that Yulia Mendel, as an individual who was not merely associated with power, but was actually within the president's office itself, at the very outset of Volodymyr Zelensky's presidential term. And it's probable she comprehends precisely how the president's office is currently shaping its communication strategies. And she also strongly asserts that it's crucial to openly acknowledge the undeniable fact that the conditions for Ukraine are deteriorating repeatedly. However, the most significant and triggering aspect of this particular post really revolves around the reactions it generated. Hang on a second, this piece of news, it's right here. So just take a look at who reposted Mendel's specific post. Indeed, Kirill Dmitriev, the Russian president's special envoy, who was involved in these negotiations, was in Miami a month prior, engaging directly with Witkoff. And it's widely rumored, although this information, my friends, remains unconfirmed, that Dmitriev significantly contributed to the formulation of these 28 points. And precisely for this reason, there is currently a prevailing notion, a kind of cliché, that the authorship of the 28-point plan is not attributed to the Americans, but rather squarely to the Russians. And it was written perhaps and co-signed by Witkoff somewhere along the way. The United States is consistently refuting this at every turn. But not only Ukrainians got that impression. For instance, the Poles did too, as Donald Tusk publicly questioned, before any discussion, we need to know the author. Well, Rubio replied, we, the Americans, are the authors. Anyway, Kirill Dmitriev reposted Mendel's post, and look how he manipulated it. He referred to them as warmongers in the EU, didn't he? Do you grasp that? Every subsequent agreement for Ukraine will only deteriorate further because we are losing. Ukraine, we are actually losing, right? There. So the European Union, he writes this to, well, Great Britain and the European Union, right? From the former press secretary, Zelensky's previous press secretary, correct? Then these words, each subsequent deal for Ukraine, each. Every subsequent agreement, indeed, the very next deal concerning Ukraine, is destined to be progressively worse, simply because undeniably, we, meaning Ukraine, are currently experiencing a significant setback and are in fact losing at this precise moment. So that's Kirill Dmitriev for you. And after that, accordingly, this appears. So this arises, right? Where Zelensky states, someone with a Ukrainian passport promotes a Russian stance somewhere. So how are they promoting it? Posts are written, reposted, and then pressure is applied. But to whom? There's diplomacy, which is supposed to be doing its job. Now, this statement, even from someone without a Ukrainian passport, closely reflects the ongoing sentiment and events, mirroring them quite precisely. There's a famous British journalist, Niall Ferguson, without a Ukrainian passport, who also, well, he essentially advocates that Ukraine should come to terms with the reality of the present circumstances you see, with a certain motivation that he explains. Now you'll say that, well, Niall Ferguson doesn't live in Ukraine, he doesn't live under missile attacks every day, and he's not sitting in a Ukrainian trench. But look, he's a prominent thought leader right in Europe. Britain is a tremendous friend to Ukraine. So he essentially writes that journalists might disagree with the plan for Gaza. He pens that journalists may indeed object to or even express dissatisfaction with the 20-point plan presented for Gaza. However, he emphasizes that conflicts do not simply conclude, particularly not based on the sheer volume of articles published discussing them. Wars end with victory or compromise. This plan exists. It confirms Ukraine's sovereignty. It offers Ukraine security assurances explicitly endorsed by the United States of America. It also makes provisions for Ukraine's rebuilding. And if you want to reclaim territories and put Putin on trial, you need to win the war. And if we are to be realistic about it, Ukraine was never truly in a position to emerge victorious against the Russian Federation. One could genuinely contend here because the moment, and this is solely my personal opinion, that was formulated in 2023, indeed, following the liberation of certain parts of the Kherson and Kharkiv regions, that presented a truly opportune moment. And even American generals, and there are publications and active interviews from that time, NATO generals, they said it was a good moment to make deals. Therefore, one could certainly disagree with Ferguson on this matter. Back then, Ukraine truly held an advantage, right? What's happened since over 2.5 years means conditions have shifted. And based on the current conditions, this is what Ferguson is saying. So how is that different from Mendel or Honcharenko? What Ferguson is stating. Additionally, there's another intriguing example, a truly fascinating account from the Washington Post. David Ignatius, or rather David Ignatius, is indeed a prominent and widely recognized columnist for the Washington Post. Drawing upon his own sources, he effectively corroborates the account, indicating that specific provisions, such as those pertaining to post-war amnesty, the ultimate scale of Ukraine's armed forces, and certain territorial matters concerning Donbass were all discussed and considered, which are currently on hold and put aside. At least the representative for Ukraine at the mayoral conference was privy to all this information. So Ignatius writes that he heard this. Does that then mean Ignatius also represents a Russian viewpoint, or is he no longer articulating a Russian perspective? How does this differ from the posts and examples that are currently available to find across the internet? And it doesn't take much time. I just gathered this, but it doesn't take much time. And then a truly strange story follows. Yet another one, this time from the Financial Times. So we have yet another publication quite contentious, which uncovers a thoroughly unappealing story concerning Russian assets. Europe and the United States are currently in a considerable public dispute regarding Trump's proposal to allocate $200 billion 50-50 for Ukraine's rebuilding and collaborative American-Russian projects once peace is restored. Europe, however, insists, no, we were meant to distribute that $200 billion ourselves and send it to Ukraine via some fund. Thus, it appears that the prevailing impression is one of complete deception. The European Union's position currently seems quite resolute. We're reducing 28 points down to 24, and will then advance a particular narrative which Putin quite obviously will not accept. Right, but then what's the motivation? Why? Are you really supporting Ukraine that much? Or are you genuinely vying for influence over the funds, specifically the $200 billion? It's simply a question, and here's another one, a rather straightforward one. Question. And you know, Financial Times, all right, but the reaction, it truly resonated with me, you know, because it really strongly resembles a fish in a fishbowl reaction, resembling a fish just staring at you blankly without comprehending what you're asking of it. When asked about the European Union's proposed counterplan, a question directed at United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio, he responded with the following.
No counterplan known. I haven't seen any counterplan. All right, guys, thank you.
I see. It is exactly as you say. This serves as an excellent illustration of diplomatic focus. And honestly, regardless of what's currently being written or said about the conflict between Vance, Rubio, and others, what I genuinely appreciate regarding the institutional integrity of the United States is that if we have a particular path forward with specific objectives we're aiming for, we then diligently pursue those goals. Everything else implies, well, that we are engaging in discussions with Ukraine, but we aren't embracing countless proposals or opinions and then attaching labels to them. We simply focus on the task at hand. We just work. 3 more days until Thanksgiving, friends.